So we have some really big news around CD Projekt and Cyberpunk 2077, looking at just some story or quest details around the game that have been shared over the past couple of weeks, but also we got an interesting interview that share really important and massive details on the future of the company itself, such as multiplayer being worked on for Cyberpunk 2077 and a second Cyberpunk game already being in the works. And the most interesting part is it's all from a Polish interview or website that you probably didn't see initially. There's going to be a lot to unpack in this video, and there's going to be a lot more coming in the next weeks and months, so if you guys do want to subscribe or leave a like, I do encourage you to do so. But otherwise, without further ado, let's actually look at some of these massive new details around CD Projekt, the developer behind Cyberpunk 2077. Earlier today, we got some details from bankier.pl. I'm definitely butchering that. It is a Polish website that actually was able to speak with the CEO of CD Projekt. From this, we found out a few interesting things. First and foremost, apparently the pre-sales of Cyberpunk are very strong and notably stronger than even The Witcher 3, although they do caution how the pre-sale has only been live for a couple of weeks now, so it is still a relatively small data set to go off of. But even further, the CEO of CD Projekt also remarked how currently CD Projekt is working on 3 projects regarding Cyberpunk 2077, one of which is going to be the base version of the game, Cyberpunk 2077 itself. Earlier last year, we actually heard how CD Projekt Red opened up an additional studio that with CD Projekt Red Wrocław. At the time, they detailed how it would actually be aiding in the production and creation of Cyberpunk 2077 along with some of the more main studios. But today we hear they're working on something very specific around Cyberpunk 2077, and that is actually multiplayer. So the exact quote from the article, which is translated, does mention how the president or CEO of CD Projekt Red does mention how a team of about 40 people from the studio are actually working on a multiplayer mode for Cyberpunk 2077. This is definitely not the first we've heard about multiplayer. It was mentioned in the past how multiplayer would likely come for the game, but it certainly wouldn't be a release feature, but rather something that came post-release of the game, with many headlines reading how they're pretty much solely focused on single player at least up until release. So considering how monumental an announcement this was, I was kind of wary that there was some kind of translation error. I did actually ask somebody who spoke Polish and he said, no, that's roughly what it says. So yeah, I mean, there's honestly no additional details outside of that, just that apparently this tertiary studio is actually working on multiplayer for the game. Now, as far as how this will fit in, I don't really know, and even what exactly this is. Maybe it's just an attempt to see if multiplayer would actually work, to see if they could actually get it running in a pretty good way, and then they'll go forward with it as an actual mode or even some kind of expansion for the game. Or alternatively, maybe this is something they're very much so committed to and something they plan to add to Cyberpunk. That was one of the interesting things I found when actually reporting on some of those older multiplayer remarks. One of the exact quotes from Eurogamer that got a lot of attention was from CD Projekt in regards to multiplayer. We're not saying no, but we're not saying yes. If something does happen, it will definitely be post-launch, and that is as much as I can say right now. It wasn't like just a flat out, nope, it's not happening. It was more of a, hey, yeah, we're working on it, but we're not talking about that just yet. We're focusing on release right now. So that definitely does fit in with this more recent news that the Wrocław studio is working on it. Some other interesting things to fit in. Apparently, this game isn't going to have microtransactions. I'm pretty curious to see how a multiplayer mode would work without microtransactions, or maybe that was said just in reference to the single player part, or maybe the multiplayer mode will kind of be a separate branch off that you have to pay for, and honestly, I wouldn't be totally opposed to that. Maybe similar to how Far Cry Blood Dragon worked way back when, if you remember that game. But taking it all together, it's honestly not that hard to see why CD Projekt would want to go this route. It's really hard to deny the success that Grand Theft Auto has seen with Grand Theft Auto Online. CD Projekt Red, being a publicly traded company, may want to kind of bite into some of that success, and this is their avenue for doing so. Plus, if anything, even though I know a lot of people kind of shy away from this, we have to remember this company has made a lot of great decisions thus far. If there's one company I had faith in for making a not super aggressive as far as microtransactions go online mode, it would be CD Projekt Red. And even though that in and of itself is a massive announcement, there's actually more. In the same article, we also hear about the third Cyberpunk related project, and seemingly it's going to be another new Cyberpunk game. One of the vice presidents, whose name I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce, remarked how the next big CD Projekt game will also be set in the world of Cyberpunk. You have to assume this is in reference to that AAA RPG RPG coming before 2021. If you're not familiar, a couple of years ago, CD Projekt did announce that they would have 2 AAA games coming out before 2021, one of them, of course, being Cyberpunk 2077, and seemingly the next one will also be a Cyberpunk game. Although from their financial conference earlier this year, we heard that it's going to be AAA, but not quite as large as something like The Witcher 3 or Cyberpunk 2077. At the time, it seemed like they were really saying this to convey the fact that, hey, this new AAA game isn't The Witcher 4, but in doing so, it made it at least seem to me like it wouldn't be another massive title. And I think any of us would be kind of silly to think that we're getting 2 Cyberpunk-sized games in just 2 years apart from each other. And I guess, yeah, now going forward, I can't just call Cyberpunk 2077 Cyberpunk, I have to be more specific, because apparently there's 2 Cyberpunks on the way. Later in the article, they do talk about how the next Cyberpunk game is something they're already working on, it's going to be set in the same universe, but also that it's a really big project and going to be quite innovative for them. Although it is worth mentioning, just as a disclaimer, technically CD Projekt themselves never say that this new Cyberpunk game that they're working on that's big and innovative is the other game coming before 2021. They simply refer to it as its next big game, so it's easy to make that connection, but again, I just wanted to draw that conclusion in case you guys interpret it differently. One of the parts that has me really interested around this is, we did hear that Cyberpunk 2077 was getting expansions. Now, hypothetically, one of these expansions could be that multiplayer mode, but you have to assume there'll also be single-player expansions, barring they go the route of Rockstar. If that does hold true, and we do actually get single-player expansions, between 2020 and 2021, there will seemingly be a lot of Cyberpunk content coming at us. The release of Cyberpunk 2077, the multiplayer mode, the expansions, and then in just the next year, apparently a totally new AAA Cyberpunk game. It seems like it'll be taking place in the same universe, but you have to imagine, based off the way it's described as being very innovative, there'll be a pretty substantial twist on CD Projekt's formula. It'll do something different and not just be another game in the same franchise. So those are the 3 Cyberpunk-related projects, but there's actually 2 more that aren't Cyberpunk-related. One of them being Gwent, that's a currently released card game that they have been updating and releasing packs for, but they're also working on a new game under Spoko. Basically, the way this worked was, Spoko is a mobile game company. They produce several of those over the past few years. Last year it was announced how that company reached out to CD Projekt wanting to make a game around one of their IPs. CD Projekt liked the idea, they thought it was innovative, so they became a majority shareholder of Spoko. They're currently working on that game. All we really know is it's based off of one of CD Projekt's IPs. Technically, we don't know if it's a AAA game or a mobile game or what, but considering Spoko has only made mobile games, it seems pretty safe to assume it is going to be mobile, and some people are speculating it was a mobile version of Gwent. But all in all, there are 5 projects currently underway at CD Projekt, 3 of them being Cyberpunk based. So Cyberpunk 2077, the multiplayer mode for Cyberpunk 2077, this new Cyberpunk game we don't know much about, the unannounced Spoko game, as well as Gwent. And if that all wasn't enough, we also get details around what CD Projekt will talk about in relation to Cyberpunk at future conferences. We know that they're going to be at Gamescom in August, and they say how it's basically going to be the same as the E3 event, so outside of new information from interviews, I wouldn't expect a ton at that point. But then at PAX West, which is at the end of August in Seattle, they're going to actually publicly present that gameplay that was shown privately at this year's E3. I made a full video on my reactions to that if you do want to check it out. But then what seems like totally new information that we actually didn't know yet. Reportedly early next year, a preview of this game will be shown, and by then, industry journalists will be playing the game and writing about it. This is pretty interesting because it certainly sounds like to me that around early 2020, there'll be kind of a Greenbrier event if you've been following this channel or Fallout 76, a hands-on event where the media can actually play Cyberpunk probably for a limited time. That will be massive. That'll be when you really see the nitty-gritty of the game. You see it from different people's perspectives, different people trying different things, and I just really hope I get invited to whatever that event ends up being. So those are some pretty important dates to keep in mind. It certainly seems like there might be a bit of a dry spell or we'll go quiet following this August, but again, at the end of August, we should have that 48 to 50 minutes of gameplay, which will probably be pretty massive. But then you might have to wait until early 2020 to actually get additional gameplay or information, at least if all of this is the complete picture. So taking that all together, that's really big. Multiplayer, an additional Cyberpunk game on the way, and an estimated timeline as to what we can expect from the current Cyberpunk game over the next few months. But transitioning into some of the other news, I was actually planning to do this video on all of this next news, then we got the massive bomb drop that, hey, multiplayer, new Cyberpunk game. But in addition, we did recently learn that Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be roughly 80 gigabytes in size. We found this out because some of the pre-order pages did go up, and on those you could see a estimated download size, which is actually kind of unusual. Typically this is only updated closer to the release of the game, but following this news breaking, we actually got more explicit confirmation from one of the community managers that no, yeah, this is actually a rough estimate. That going forward, it may actually be slightly higher or lower than this 80 gigabytes, and this is actually one of the reasons that the game isn't shipping with a disc as far as PC physical copies go, due to the technical limitations of a disc with a file size this large. And for comparison, this is roughly twice the size of The Witcher 3, at least on release, which doesn't inherently say a lot. It could just be a lot of higher res textures and things along those lines, but in general, if you were seeking more evidence that Cyberpunk 2077 is a massive game, then this is some of that. We also hear quite a bit about kill or no kill playthroughs, whether it be doing a playthrough where you try and kill every enemy NPC or a playthrough where you try and not kill a single enemy NPC. As far as kill everything playthroughs go, it's reported how Cyberpunk 2077 won't exactly have that. You won't be able to kill every single person you encounter, but they try and allow you to do so when possible. Their justification in this response was basically that many of these are central story characters, and being able to kill them would really put a big rift in the story, and they can't allow that all of the time. It just isn't feasible. Conversely, let's say you don't want to kill anybody, that actually is possible. If you want to do a sneak-focused, non-lethal playthrough, it sounds like you're actually going to have a lot of options for that. It's described how nearly all of the weapons in the game, as well as much of the cyberware in the game, is going to have a non-lethal setting. So you could still use your favorite gun, but you're going to have the option that when you take somebody down, it won't finish them off completely. It's described how you can knock them down, choke them, or make them sleep, alternative to just finishing them off totally. This applies to almost everything, with a few exceptions. One named is a bazooka at point blank range, but either way, if you were wanting to do a very pacifist playstyle, it seems like this game will be very accommodating of that. Even further, we hear about how Cyberpunk 2077 is actually going to be more open and have more options when it comes to romance compared to the other games, such as The Witcher 3. It's described how in this game you're going to be able to define your character, including their sexuality. You can make your own character one of the various sexuality options, but even further, other characters you do encounter may be bi, straight, or somewhere in between the two. And they justify this by saying they want the world to feel real. These are things that actually occur in real life, and as a result of that, they're going to appear in this game. It's also described how you'll have a lot of options with some of your interpersonal relationships. There's going to be casual ones, but there's going to be complicated and serious ones that can progress over the course of the game. It's actually described how you could have either a meaningful relationship with some characters or alternatively just go for a one-night stand. And as far as just some other miscellaneous information we got over the past few days, one user actually asked one of the developers on Twitter whether or not you can max out a character in its entirety in a single playthrough, and he basically describes how that's probably not going to be likely, mainly because Cyberpunk is mostly about replayability and choices, so allowing you to max out your character on your first playthrough wouldn't really encourage replayability and additional choice. It would kind of give you access to a lot of things, and that doesn't make you want to replay it again. A separate Twitter question, somebody asked how the open world will be in this game, and it was basically described as a full open world, similar to The Witcher 3, where you can kind of just go anywhere. You can get lost doing side missions or just discovering miscellaneous things, and of course, this game will not feature load screens for this open world. That is, unless you fast travel. And just one final note before we end off this video totally, it also was recently announced that Cyberpunk 2077 is getting a cosplay contest. This is pretty cool, and they're giving away $40,000 as well as a bunch of additional things in prizes. And they're actually giving away money even to those who just qualify for some of the final rounds, so it's not like it's super difficult to win anything here. I'll have a link to that video down below if you guys do want to check it out. I just kind of wanted to give it a shout out in case one of you would feel inspired to participate as a result of this. But either way, yeah, everything is coming together to sound quite awesome for Cyberpunk 2077. With each passing week, it just feels like we're getting more and more good news for this game, getting me even more excited for its eventual release. But with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video as always, and with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.